It's a soft launch.
That's fine. We can chit chat.
Oh, it says live YouTube.
Oh, that's fun.
That's great.
But I'm just gonna keep chit chatting with you, and then the people who showed up early, they get this bonus content.
Right.
And then at 7:30, 4:30 Pacific, 6:30 Central,
5:30 Mountain, which is always left out.
I know. I believe me, I was not going to leave out Mountain Time. In fact, I'm going to tweet one more time that we're going live. We are live. Watch Mo, Rocca, and I discuss all things Mo Rocca.
I love places, please, place. Oh, please. Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, it was for the theater fans.
Curtain up, like the lights.
Were you a theater kid? You were, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, I loved it. But you went to Stage Door Manor. I went to a place called Clock, that college light opera company. So it was for college age kids, but it was amazing on Cape Cod. Incredible. 11 musicals in 12 weeks. It was nuts.
That's about what we did at Stage Door Manor, which is, for those of you watching, a famous theater camp, and maybe the most famous theater camp, which is not saying a lot, but it's something. There's
a book written about it.
There's a documentary by my friend Alexandra Shiva. There's a movie that's based on it.
Yes.
A lot of really cool actors came out of there.
Oh, my friend Amol is telling you, this is early. Tell Michael his pudding sketch from the state is my all-time favorite.
Please thank Amol for me.
Yeah.
We're about 1 minute away from the hard launch. This is the soft launch. And Mo, you're in New York City, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in the wilds of Connecticut. I was re-listening to my Neanderthal episode today, and I found it interesting all over again.
Oh, good. It's amazing. I thought it would get dated really quick, but all the discoveries end up sort of being the same. They really haven't learned that much more about it in the last few years, so it'll be current for a while. It
was driving me a little bit crazy that I wasn't saying Neanderthal, because I know that is the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
And I don't remember why I wasn't saying it. Maybe because I didn't want to sound pretentious.
Well, also probably because I kept saying Neanderthal and you were just being gracious. Yeah.
Maybe.
No good songs about Connecticut. It's amazing. There's like one Connecticut song that Bing Crosby and Judy Garland sang. And all they keep doing, you have to get Alexa to play it. It's all they go is, Connecticut is the place for me. Connecticut is the place for me. And there are no details. At one point, Judy says, he's such a Yale guy. And that's it. That's the only specific.
She doesn't rhyme it with, he's such a Yale guy, such a swell guy.
She actually does rhyme it. And I can't remember what, it's something like that. But it does not do justice to Connecticut.
Well, speaking of which, we are now at T+1, and I am going to do an official introduction for this event. So Mo, and watchers, listeners, viewers, I want to welcome you to this event, which is in conjunction with the Mark Twain Library. It was originally supposed to be at the Mark Twain Library here in Reading, Connecticut. And for those of you who may not know, the public library here in Reading, Connecticut was founded by Mark Twain himself in 1908. This is late in his life. He moved to Reading, Connecticut. He built a home here. And soon after that, he donated 3,000 of his own books and a little bit of money to give our little country town a library and a window onto the wider world. And when Mark Twain started our library, he did so with the intention that it be supported by the community, not by tax dollars. Some libraries are obviously fully funded by tax dollars. This one is not. It does get some help, but volunteers have to raise about $400,000 every year to keep it going. So this event, when it was first scheduled, was intended as a fundraiser for the Mark Twain Library. We had about 100 people who had paid to come to the library and listen to myself and Mo. That is obviously now impossible, but the good news is more of you are now out there and you can attend this program, which we're very happy about. We're also very happy that we get to spread the news about the Mark Twain Library, which in my personal opinion is the heart and soul of this little town in Connecticut, and it really inhabits the Mark Twain spirit. Now, obviously the bad news is the library will not reap the benefits of our wit and wisdom this evening. So if you feel so inclined and you enjoyed tonight's program, please go to the donate page on the library's website, www.marktwainlibrary.org. Throw in a couple bucks, it'll help. So I'm thrilled today to be speaking with Mo Rocca, the author of this book, Mobituaries, Great Lives Worth Reliving, which is a celebration of people and places and ideas and even entire species that are no longer with us. And in fact, we are 2 days from the anniversary of the death of our library's founder, Mark Twain, who died on April 20th, 1910. So there's some synchronicity there. Mo Rocca is, of course, also a correspondent on CBS's Sunday Morning. He's the host of the much loved and lamented television show, My Grandmother's Ravioli. He's a regular on the NPR show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and is an alumnus of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. I met him when we appeared on the VH1 series, I Love the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. And I am so glad to welcome him to this special streaming event on behalf of the Mark Twain Library. Mo Rocca, hello.
Thank you, Michael. I feel like I can almost touch you.
I feel touched by you emotionally, and that's enough for me. That's enough. I mean, I'd love to give you a hug, but in lieu of that, I'm happy to have this conversation. First things first, how is your quarantine going?
My quarantine is actually pretty busy. We're at CBS Sunday Morning, we keep doing pieces, keep putting on a broadcast, and I've never been more grateful for the structure of a work week, even though it's all happening at home. I'm very grateful for it. And it was a little bit of an adjustment at first. My boyfriend Alberto does all the cooking, I do all the cleaning. My mother is just upstairs. She is not allowed to leave. If she wants to leave, she's gonna have to pull a Rapunzel and do something to get somebody to climb up there. But it's great. It's never been better. In fact, like having her nearby.
So when you say you're obviously still putting on the broadcast, has it affected? I mean, obviously the answer is yes, but how has it affected how you report and how you put stories together?
Well, logistically, it's affected it a lot because, you know, the last few stories I've done, I think, almost exclusively from this room and from this position. So, I mean, still very collaborative with the editors and producers and correspondents working from home. But a lot of it is being done, of course, you know, by Zoom or other video chatting. The other thing is the stories. It's been really interesting to choose stories that I sort of call 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So you don't want to be escapist and just be completely tone deaf, because this is all people are talking about, right? This terrible disease. And but you want to offer some relief. So it's been a creative challenge coming up with stories that feel that the jumping off point maybe is coronavirus, is COVID-19, but it doesn't dwell on it, because that's not what people come to CBS Sunday Morning for. They've never come for 100% hard news. So
I saw that you tweeted that your story tomorrow is about the backgrounds people choose for conversations like this.
Well, and you mentioned I Love the 80s, a series that was when I first became aware of Simon Doonan, art director, fashion commentator, writer, funny guy, and his husband, Jonathan Adler. So they're the commentators tomorrow, and they're great. And just sort of picking apart in a loving way, the surroundings of people. But it is interesting because, you know, even when I first got on with you here, my eyes are drifting towards your surroundings, and it does create a kind of intimacy. I mean, you know, obviously a lot of people are probably self-conscious about where they're set.
I had this set built for tonight.
Okay, but you should have had the lights built in front of you. That's what everyone's saying, right? No, but I like that you're backlit. It's kind of, it adds.
Does it make me look angelic?
It kind of does. It kind of does. It's almost like it's almost creating sort of a filtered effect. And I don't have a lot of lighting in here. That's a deficiency of this apartment. So I put basically all the lights that there are in front of me. But yeah, it is sort of interesting. And there's a serious side to it. The New York Times had an article about students who are remote learning and how this is revealing class divides, because some kids that come from families where there's not a lot of money may feel self-conscious when suddenly their backgrounds are being revealed, their visual backgrounds. So we're learning a lot about each other in unexpected ways.
One of the great joys for me has been discovering that celebrities also have terrible taste. Yeah,
right. That's true. A sameness, all this. And they always explain it away by saying mid-century modern. But it's really just that they didn't want to make strong choices. Everything is stripped down and kind of bland. It's a lot of bland decor. Yeah, a lot of that. So, you know, I want the person with like the crushed velvet and just the ornate stuff back there.
Tell me about some of the pieces that I'm seeing behind you. Who is over your right shoulder?
So over my right shoulder, right over here, I'm a nerdy presidential history buff. And I found years ago a Benjamin Harrison, Levi Morton. Benjamin Harrison is
my favorite Beatle. He doesn't get the respect that
he is. He only wishes he were a Beatle. He's basically he's the 23rd president. His only distinction is he's the guy that's in that Grover Cleveland sandwich, because we all know that Grover Cleveland had 2 non-consecutive terms. He's in between. And it's said that he had a handshake like a wilted petunia, so he is sort of squishy. But I found a campaign neckerchief, and I thought it was kind of such an odd, just a neat little campaign item. We don't make campaign neckerchiefs anymore. So he and his running mate, Levi Morton, are on this neckerchief, which I had framed.
I'm surprised that there's not a Make America Great Again N95 mask.
That's probably happening right now. There definitely got to be a bandana or something like that.
I'm sure. So yeah, the neckerchief or bandana feels like a very Trumpian campaign item, not necessarily with the sort of lacy, frilly border, but it's very charming.
Probably without the border. And did you ever do Boy Scouts? Were you ever a Boy Scout?
I went to one meeting with my son when he was about 7. And it honestly kind of frightened me.
Right.
I didn't like seeing adult men in like sort of pseudo-military uniforms walking around with young kids. I'm sure they're a great organization, but it made me feel a little bit
it felt
German 1930s to me.
Got it. It felt, right. I see what you're saying.
It was a little martial for me.
Right. Militia-ish, like. Well, I did Cub Scouts, and I started in the Boy Scouts, and I crapped out really early. But neckerchiefs were a big part of it. I seem to remember that.
Yes.
Holding a neckerchief in the correct way.
Yes. Everything it seemed like had to be done in the correct way. And can you tell me about the horn above you?
So the trumpet is my father's trumpet. My father took it up late in life, and he played when he took it up. My mother got it for him as a Christmas present in Christmas 1975, and he had played as a boy. Had given it up because life interfered. He went, to college, then into the Army, started a small business, raised a family, but it talked a lot about how he wished he had never given up the trumpet. My mother went to a pawn shop. It sounds like we grew up in the 1930s, but she went to a pawn shop in downtown DC and bought this trumpet. And he, every single morning for a half hour in the basement, in the cellar of our house in Bethesda, Maryland, would play the scales, practice, work on his embouchure, which
What's
is
embouchure?
embouchure is
That's whale oil, right? The oil that's
sounds like it's how your lips fit around the mouthpiece. It's really hard. It's really hard. And then at night he would play in the cellar. He'd go back after work and play an hour of Dixieland jazz, and I would roller skate around and pretend that it was Innsbruck 1976 and I was skating for the gold.
That's a delight. Now, how good did he get at trumpet? I mean, I would imagine quite good.
He was starting late in life. And so he was under no illusion that he was going to become, that he was going to end up playing at the Blue Note, but he just played with his complete heart and soul. And he had a really great tone. And I could recognize that as a kid. He had a very nice singing voice. And so his tone was very, very good. And so he had a few of his buddies got together. They formed a Dixieland jazz band called the Metrotones. And they would play assisted living, nursing homes, sometimes restaurants. That was sort of when they got really good. So they were good. They were good. But, it was never about becoming a jazz star. But it was one of the great loves of his life.
And one of the lovely things in your book is that you actually dedicate the book to your dad.
Yeah.
And you give him his own Mobituary.
Yeah.
And it's really lovely. You say, sometimes I would roller skate in the cellars. He was playing in the evening. There was laundry hanging in 2 rows. I would skate in and out between hanging towels and bed sheets. And I'm skipping. All I knew was that in that moment, I was at Innsbruck winning gold. The Saints go marching in. Say what you will about my routine, but my music selection was out of the box. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the great things about this book and the Mobituaries podcast itself is it takes what I think can be a grim subject for people and makes it celebratory and irreverent without ever losing the reverence. It's both reverent and irreverent. And how did Mobituaries come to be?
Well, I love doing profiles, and I've done them on Sunday Morning for a long time. I like people's stories, and this is set by a lot of great obit writers, including Marguerite Fox, who was a really great one for the New York Times for quite a long time, said, a great obituary is about someone's life, not their death. I'm not all that interested in how people die. I'm actually more interested in their beginnings. And one of the joys I get out of reading obituaries, and this is something I inherited from my father. He used to always say, "Oh boy, the obits is my favorite section of the paper." And my father was not gloomy at all. But it does have a sweep to it. If it's well done, it has that rush of like when you go and like the movie trailer for an Oscar-winning biopic oftentimes has that kind of sweep. It's oftentimes better than the movie, but I kind of like that rush when I read obits, and I also thought, frankly, it was just a really convenient device for telling any story. A friend of mine who's one of the senior producers on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, this guy named Ian Chillag, who's so talented. He has a podcast called Everything is Alive, and when I was telling him about this idea at the beginning, I said, is this too loose? Is it too broad? Because you can fit anything into it. Is that a demerit in a way? Is that make it less than? And he looked at me and he said, any good podcast idea is an excuse to talk about anything. And I thought that was really wise. And I think that goes for all kinds of creativity. Like good ideas are constantly refillable, I think.
I think you're right. And it also has the convenience of your name ends in O, and then there's
Totally. Yeah, Mo is so convenient. I've heard that name as much as I can. I mean, I'm so glad my parents didn't name me Cecil, which was one of the finalists, I think. So.
One of the things that strikes me about the book and the podcast is so many of the people that you talk about, or maybe it's really just the way you talk about them. There's a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Not quite nostalgia, something more specific than that. It's kind of like a winsome nostalgia where it feels like you're celebrating these lives and looking back on them in a way that feels slightly out of time. I'm thinking about right now, like your Vaughn Meader story, which, and if you haven't read this or you haven't listened to the podcast about Vaughn Meader, why don't you explain who he was?
Vaughn Meader was once wildly famous. He was a stand-up comedian who frankly wasn't very good, was working the nightclubs in Greenwich Village in the early 60s, but he happened to have an uncanny ability to impersonate President John F. Kennedy, just savant-like. And two producers, one of whom is alive, two great comedy album producers, and comedy albums were very new at the time. Bob Newhart had just had his great comedy album, which had won the Grammy for Album of the Year. But these two producers—
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it won the Grammy for Album of the Year.
Wow.
I think 1961, 1962. And so this record producing team, comedy album producing team, said, look, we've got this new glamorous family in the White House. We've got this new boom in comedy albums, this new medium, really. And so let's do one that parodies this first family. And indeed, that was the name of it. The First Family album featured Vaughn Meader as John F. Kennedy. And then there was an actress, Naomi Brossard, who played Jackie Kennedy, and then actors who played the kids. And this became the highest selling album of all time very quickly. It's since been eclipsed. And it too won, I think it won Album of the Year at the Grammys. It was a huge deal. He was a household name. And then November 22nd, 1963 came, and he essentially vanished. He became this living reminder of this horrible day. And we found in the CBS archives, one of our producers, Megan Marcus, found in the archives a 90-minute interview. It was kind of gold that she found, of Vaughn Meader shortly before his death. He died in 2004, telling his life story, a harrowing story, especially when you consider the 40 years he lived after the assassination. And it was really like 40 years in the desert. So it's a story about the death of a career, but it was also a story about a death of a kind of comedy that I'm not saying should come back, the kind of comedy that was very gentle. When he even, and it was very innocuous, very affectionate, but Jack Parr, when he introduced Vaughn Meader on television in his heyday, essentially prepared the audience, almost like a trigger warning, like someone is going to poke fun at the president. It's something that you just didn't do. And I think what you're referring to about not nostalgia is I feel a certain wistfulness about just periods that have—
That's the word I'm looking for. I knew winsome wasn't the right word at all, which is why I was hesitant to say it, but it was the only word I had in my head.
Right.
Exactly the word that I wanted.
Yeah. And you know, we wanted to kind of memorialize not just the man, but that time.
Right.
And I definitely feel like it's, this is not, I like to cut the past some slack. You can't cancel the past. And I think we have to be really careful about kind of wagging our finger at the past. And this came up in several episodes, and making sure that we're not being smug. And so, like I said, I'm not saying that kind of comedy should come back. I mean, it treated Kennedy overly respectfully, perhaps, but it happened, and we should acknowledge it and pay respect to it.
And it's that wistfulness that it kind of exists throughout the book, and it's very charming, and it made me wonder about you as a guy, because I feel like you inhabit that kind of wistfulness. There's something slightly out of time about you.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you recognize that and whether it relates to your work.
Part of it is that I had older parents, which from a pretty early time, I kind of appreciated it. My parents were older. They were not, my father thought that Elvis Presley was kind of like new and edgy. I mean, he was born in my mother will kill me if I say when they were born, but I forget what that generation is called. It's the one right after the Greatest Generation, but before the Boomers. I think they might be called the Lost Generation. But in any case, I always had older parents, and I always had them. And you know, and I oftentimes think, you know, the year that I fantasized if I had been born in 1888. That's sort of the year I set on, because I thought if I were born in 1988, then at the fin de siècle, at the 1900, you know, it's such an exciting time, such an optimistic time. I'd be 12 years old, looking at it with wide-eyed wonder. And then I would be too old to serve in World War I because I don't do well with trenches or mustard gas. And then I would be in vaudeville doing the 5 a day on the Orpheum circuit. And then when the talkies came in, I would end up doing kind of fun character roles in early television. I'd probably be like a contemporary of William Frawley and Vivian Vance. And then I would die in the 60s. And that would have been a pretty great life. I'm happy to be alive now, but I sort of have gamed it out in the past.
Yeah, well, clearly you gamed it out. I mean, you've got a whole resume gamed out. I mean, that's so funny to me because your life is not so different than that. You were born in 1969. You were 31 at the turn of the millennium, which is cooler than the turn of the century. There was a lot of technology and interesting things unfolding in the world. When 2001 came, you were too old to serve in the war.
Right.
And you now, you then appeared on The Daily Show, which was a groundbreaking show. And now you are still doing television and I don't know when you're going to die, but hopefully it will be quite a while from now. So, I mean, it seems like the life you gained out in a lot of ways is the life that you're living.
I think, you know, you've made me feel so much better about things because I'd never really thought about it, but I think you're right. And we also have to remember that I think people born in 1900, I think the life expectancy was 42 or 43. Now that's partly because of the infant mortality being factored in. And I do think I'm going to live a long time. So all in all, I'm happy to have been born when I was. So let's just say that after 1969, my second choice would have been 1888.
And also the other unfortunate parallel to what you were just talking about is in 1917, you would have experienced a pandemic, and now we are also experiencing a pandemic. And
well, yeah. Can I tell you, by the way, one of the grandmothers that I learned to cook from on my cooking show that you sweetly referred to, Clara Corrado, I just talked to her the other day. She was born and raised in Philadelphia. And she's about 101. She's in great shape. And I said to her, Clara, I know that you were born in 1918, so you don't remember the pandemic of 1918, but do you ever remember hearing anything about it? And she said, oh, honey, my older brother died of it. I mean, it was kind of wild, that connection with the past. I said, really? And she said, yeah, he died right before I was born. She said he was 14 years old. And the night, it was so sad. She said, the night before he died, he said to my mother, tomorrow, Mom, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go and get a job and help us earn money. Oh. So, I mean, it was in hearing that from her, and she sort of told me in a kind of chirpy way. She's really remarkable, and she's still on her feet cooking. But yes, of course, things were rough back then.
Yeah, and we're obviously dealing with a period now, and especially in New York City, and where I am in Connecticut, a kind of intense collective grief. And I'm wondering how. I know you said that your stories for the show are kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I'm wondering how it's affecting you personally, and if that sort of collective grief, how you're processing it and dealing with it. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question, because it feels so individual, even though we're all dealing with it as a collective.
Well, I mean, I'm sure I'm burying myself in work, partly because of this. And I look out my window at 6th Avenue and, you know, and I always look to see if the lights are red or green, because I'll see no cars and I'll think, oh, well, all the cars must be stopped, right? And then I'll see, no, actually the 6th Avenue lights are green right now. They should be streaming up. You know, I think having family close by, and, you know, being concerned about their well-being kind of keeps me occupied as well as my work. I have been giving a lot of thought also to, and these are not as important as the people, but kind of the institutions and the things and the traditions that are being lost. I find myself, when I'm reading articles about, say, the post office, they have chunkier history sections. They're almost written like pre-obits in a way.
Right.
So you'll hear, so I'm reading, I think, an AP article about the post office and how it might be at death's door. And then it says the post office was founded by, you know, Benjamin Franklin. It goes on with all these interesting factoids. And then you think, oh my God, this is like the early draft for the obituary for the post office. So there's a lot of loss to go around.
Yeah, there's a heightened poignancy about all kinds of things. Broadway, for example, which, you know, is such a, I mean, it's not even worth saying, but such a New York institution.
You know, I used to, if we kind of say on Broadway very quickly, I used to, when I was a kid, you know, it was a big deal in the summer to take the Amtrak train up to see a Broadway musical. And I wanted to be on Broadway so badly. And I was afraid. I would read articles in the early 80s about how Broadway, the mega musical, was going to destroy Broadway. And my father used to sit on the edge of my bed and he'd say, don't worry, Broadway will still be there when you get there. It used to keep me up at night. I was so afraid that Broadway would die.
I am an optimist about the long-term survival of Broadway and, incidentally, of the post office. But it does call your attention to so much of what we take for granted, including, for example, the Mark Twain Library, which I'm here in support of. If you're joining us late, it's the library in my town of Reading, Connecticut, that Mark Twain founded in 1908. And it is public institutions in particular, which, well, private institutions, public, all institutions that you look at with a slightly different eye now. And it gives you, I think, a much broader perspective, as you were saying, on the history of these things and why they're so valuable and why we value them. In that sense, you know, that is a slight silver lining, that it really does cause us to reevaluate the things in our lives, people, institutions, that at time even that we really value. Mm-hmm. I want to ask a couple questions that came in from Readingites here from the Mark Twain Library. The first is from Peg. And I want to point out that every year here in the wilds of Connecticut, we do an event called Pudd'nhead, which is a gala celebrating humor, celebrating words in the spirit of Mark Twain. You have been several times.
Great event.
Which is it is so flattering to me that you come and that you come back. That is such a thrill. And she wants to know, I know you've been to our little town. What is your impression of it? And be kind, because we love it here. You can be nothing but kind, so I'm not worried about that.
Well, I mean, you know, I was going to rave about your interviews with Roz Chast and with Seth Meyers. I've been a few times. Everyone is so friendly, and the town is lovely, and it's the care that everyone has clearly for this library. I mean, it's just it is treated as the precious thing it deserves to be treated as. So I also, by the way, I keep thinking that song "Peg of My Heart." No one's named Peg anymore. It's just
not enough pegs out there.
Yeah.
And the reason is, I think the reason that we treat it the way we do is because it was founded by Mark Twain, and it feels like we are protecting a little bit of American culture here, and it feels important.
And by the way, that quote is apocryphal. The one about reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. I was reading up on it before because it's so bit related, that somebody from the New York Journal called him and said, I hear that you're near death. And what he actually said was, the report of my death is greatly exaggerated. I think it's close to that. Anyway, I just thought you all might want to know.
I'm thrilled to hear it. And one of the things I enjoy about you is you care about facts and you care about like historical nuggets. And what is that special delight you get from it? Because it feels like it's above average in your delight with history.
I think my three primary diet, that my pop culture, my media diet growing up, were Broadway cast albums, television, the TV Guide, but also the World Book Encyclopedia of 1974. In my bedroom over there, the walls are lined with the 1974 World Book Encyclopedia. I used to love nothing more than coming home, lying on my stomach on the red family room carpet and paging through those facts and brief for all those countries. And we never updated it because, it was expensive to get that set of encyclopedia. So for the longest time, Gerald Ford was president and there was a country called French West Africa. Like the facts never changed, but I loved the encyclopedia. And I do think it's fun. This sounds so nerdy or something. It's fun to know stuff, to know. And when you know it. When you know it. It's not fun when you're sort of searching around for it. Well, that can be fun, but it's fun to really know it.
I don't think I've ever truly known anything. I'm a person who is always slightly bullshitting about everything that I say. And I've just come to accept that about myself. This is from Brenda, who says, in reading Mobituaries, you mentioned several interesting stories that didn't make it to the book. Whose story was the hardest to cut from the final manuscript? I guess that's the question.
Well, just for time and for room, and I want to give, on the book side, acknowledgement to my wonderful co-author and friend, Jonathan Greenberg. We didn't have time to really finesse Nellie Bly.
Hold 1 second for dogs, please. For Nellie.
This is life in the video chat era. Which dog? What's the name of your dog?
I have two. One is named Oli, and he's a big white lab.
And that's just Martha Norwegian, right?
Yes, my wife's grandfather's name was Olaf, Oli. And then our other little thing is called Squash, and he is a little squash.
Nellie Bly was one that didn't make it. So if there's a sequel, I'd really love to see her in that. She's the trailblazing reporter who pretended she was crazy so that she could get into the women's sanitarium on what is now Roosevelt Island, and then wrote 10 Days in a Madhouse, which was a big sensation. And then when Jules Verne wrote 80 Days Around the World, she did it in 76. So she's it's amazing that there hasn't been a major motion picture about her. I mean, it really is Amy Adams' Oscar waiting to happen. If she's watching this, everyone says, oh, poor Amy Adams, she doesn't have an Oscar. Well, be Nellie Bly and you'll get an Oscar.
My producers are telling me that she is watching.
Good. Yeah. Well, she should do it. Somebody else is going to do it. Charlize Theron will do it if she doesn't.
And she loves your idea. Good. She's going to do it. This is something I've wondered too, because it feels so off the cuff. But I've been in show business long enough to be dubious of that. From Jenny, Mo, how do you prepare, if you prepare, for Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me?
Oh, I think I'd love to know your opinion on this. I don't really prepare, and I don't think most of us do. There's a little bit of a split on this, but I have found that the audience can sniff out when you come in with a prepared joke.
Right.
So you can come in with the best joke in the world and think, I'm just going to drop it at just the right moment. And it doesn't work. And the audience probably doesn't know why they're not laughing, but it's probably because subconsciously they can tell that you violated the contract of the show, which is that it's a group of friends getting together to kibitz, not kibbutz, to kibitz, it's the only job I've had that's both fun and easy. I find, like, when people say, oh, go and have fun, I hate that. When they say have fun, like, you can't have fun unless you're in most things, unless you're prepared and practiced or you've worked at it. Then you can really have fun. This is different. And I think it's partly because Peter Sagal and the producers build this machine and they do all this work all week during the week. And then the panelists come in and we're just sort of dropped in there and told to just talk off the cuff. They'll clean us up and edit and keep only the good stuff so we feel free to just throw everything against the wall. But it's the only thing I've ever done that's performance-wise, it's both fun and easy. The two usually don't go together in my experience.
I have found in my experience similarly that to have fun requires either what you just described, preparation. So you feel, but that preparation leads to hopefully a feeling of relaxation, so that your, I hate that I'm about to say this word, but your brain can just sort of work and be pliable and let the words come out. And what you're saying is, in preparing for that show, it actually stifles that creativity.
It kind of does, because then you're not really listening to the other panelists. If you're thinking, when can I use this joke? We write the bluffs. There's a little game called the Bluff the Listener, and we do write those.
Right.
And also, by the way, look, on the whole no preparation thing, I mean, you're obviously a great improviser and have a long history with it. And so you can correct me if I'm wrong there. I haven't done that much improv at all. But does this theory obtain when it comes to improv, that you need there are improv skills you work on in order to be good at improvising?
Yes, and yes, I think improvisational comedy, which I'm not an expert in by any means, requires a kind of framework and a set of rules that you adhere to. And it's that framework and that architecture which allows you to be free within it. It's like maybe playing music, or what you're talking about with Peter Sagal has created an architecture that you can then play within. It's not a free-for-all. You are the host of, and I want to get this name right because it's so funny to me, the National Geographic Society National Geographic B.
A lot of national in there.
It's so much national, so much geographic. Are you, and this refers to a question from Jennifer, who wants to know, do you know the capital of every country in the world? And you mentioned French Guiana, and if so, why? And I assume it's because if you do, it's because you spent so much time studying.
Well, I hadn't mentioned French Guiana, but the capital is Cayenne, which to me sounds like something I'd love to have in my spice rack. But I love the capital of Suriname, which used to be Dutch Guiana. But anyway, the capital of Suriname is Paramaribo, which has like a Paramaribo, Paramaribo. It has kind of a funny rhythm to it. Yeah, that was one of the things. I also loved the almanac. And my best friend growing up, Mario, and I, his mother worked for the World Bank. And so he would, they would get an annual report. She would get an annual report and he'd bring it home and we'd sort of pore over it and look at different countries' GDPs and the capital.
Different countries' GDPs. Me and my friend, we'd pore over it. We were so
competitive because my mother's Colombian and his parents are Chilean. And it would always make me tense up a little bit because Chile always had a higher GDP or per capita income.
There was a competition like this was your World Cup. Who had
exactly with our World Cup? I know, but Pinochet. I mean, look, Colombia didn't have to deal with that. So, but yeah, so I did learn the world capitals early on, and when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1990, I almost had a nervous breakdown because of all those new countries. I mean, it's great.
But what an exciting new opportunity for you.
It was. That is true. That is true. All those stands. And I still don't know how to use the word stand now, the way that everyone's, do your kids use that?
No, not to my face. They tend not to use any teen lingo in front of us, I think specifically so that we don't then try to use it back at them.
Okay, smart. Okay, strategic non-use.
Yes. I know that if I want to really make my son cringe, I just have to do that. DAP? Is that what I said?
Well, is that dapping? Yeah, DAP, dignity and pride.
Yeah.
I did a piece on the bro hug and how it was really rooted in the DAP that developed during the Vietnam War. Because Black troops were forbidden from using the Black Power symbol that had been used at the Olympics, right, in Mexico City. And so the DAP kind of developed as kind of a language among African-American troops. And then that became the bro hug.
Interesting.
Yeah.
you are a font of knowledge. I mean, that is sort of what you're known for, but you are a font of knowledge.
I loved doing that story, by the way. I love doing it, and it's interesting. Well, don't you love? I love things that seem like they're going to be all sugary and fun, and then you lure them in, like a guy offering candy to kids. Like you lure them in with that, and then when they're in, then it turns out. Well, let's switch to another metaphor. It ends up being much more protein than carbs. Let's just put it that way. And then it's like, oh wow, there's all this stuff there.
Right. As we wrap up, we have a couple more minutes. I do want to mention the Mark Twain Library again. If you have enjoyed this conversation, which was initially intended as a fundraiser for the Mark Twain Library, please go to www.marktwainlibrary.org. There's a donate button there. Throw in a couple bucks. Let the gals at the library buy an Eloise chapter book. Kids are looking for content. You know what I mean? And I want to thank Pam and Jen and Eric who put this event together. They are really a terrific team over there. I'll take one more question from Sean, who says, Mo, huge fan of yours, even bigger fan of Auburn University and all our traditions. How in the world did you run across Harvey Updike for your Death of a Tree, Birth of a Rivalry episode, and have you stayed in contact with him? This is a fascinating story. Can you briefly?
Sure. If you're not a college football fan, you may not know, and I was not before, but you may not know about the Auburn-Alabama college football rivalry, which puts to shame any other rivalry that you may know of. It is from the end of the Civil War, from shortly after the end of the Civil War, it tears that state, the state of Alabama, apart. You know, you think a lot of people tune into the Oscars or used to. The state stops when either of those teams play. When they play each other in the Iron Bowl each year, huge deal. Auburn had these two beautiful oak trees called the Toomer's Oak trees. They were the heart and soul of that campus, creating a natural archway. Harvey Updike Jr., and that, let's face it, that sounds like the name of a killer, right? He, a big University of Alabama fan, he poisoned the trees. They were beyond saving. They had to be cut down after a major effort to save them. It was the kind of crime that, no, it did not involve the killing of a person or an animal, but it was sickening in a very particular way. And so for Mobituaries, I wanted to do an episode on that. We located him, our team of producers located him, and I went down to Texas and spent a day with him. I was hoping to find where that line between fandom and fanaticism lies. I'm not sure that I did, but he talked a lot, and I think you do get inside of his mind and what was driving him. Of course, and this is almost going to sound cliched, he's kind of a wonderful grandpa. His adorable granddaughters love their grandpa. He's a complicated guy. It was a fascinating story with a lot of twists and turns, and I think it may be the most popular episode of the podcast.
Really?
And I was proud of that because I wanted to do a sports story that wasn't just for sports people.
Yeah. Did he? Was he charged with a crime?
He was, and he spent time in prison, and he owes about, I think it's $800,000 in restitution, which he'll never pay.
Wow.
He'll never be able to pay. And he was in prison, but it was ultimately.
What's the charge exactly?
You know, I'm forgetting what the specific charge was, but it was kind of an agricultural damage law. The amount of pesticide, by the way, that he used, it could have, if it had infiltrated the water table, it could have killed people. I mean, wow. It was really nuts what he did. But it's a story about class as well. I mean, he's what's known as part of the pickup alumni that are kind of spurned by a lot of the actual University of Alabama alumni. Harvey didn't go to college at all. And so they're a group of people who latch on to this identification and take it obviously to an extreme place. But if you listen, you'll hear how you'll be surprised. He can be funny, he can be charming. His devotion to Bear Bryant, the legendary coach of Alabama, excuse me. That could have gotten me killed. The legendary coach of Alabama is pretty powerful and kind of poignant, and how Bear Bryant became a father figure to him in his fantasy life. But yeah.
And did he express any regret?
Not really. It's odd. He didn't say that he wouldn't do it again. He expressed regret about the pain the trees went through.
Oh my gosh.
He never quite said that he wouldn't do it again if given the opportunity. It had to do. It really reminds you of the Mideast in some ways, because part of his grievance was that a statue of Bear Bryant had a jersey of Cam Newton, who went on to play in the Super Bowl, to quarterback in the Super Bowl for the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton was part of something called the Cam Back, this historic come from behind victory of Auburn over Alabama. And then somebody pinned his jersey to the Bear Bryant statue. And this was to him just deep sacrilege. I mean, and anyway, so it goes on and on, but it's pretty wild. And I found the roots, if you will, of the rivalry fascinating. How it had nothing to do at all, had to do with class, with Alabama looking down at Auburn as a cowtown college for rednecks, and now that's turned around because Tim Cook went to Auburn. I mean, the average income of Auburn alums now, it outpaces Alabama. So there are all sorts of layers to it.
So fascinating. And it's a perfect example of the Mobituary formula. Take a kind of off-kilter story and, as you were saying, lure people in with a little bit of candy, and you realize how deep some of these things go. And when you put them in a historical context and a cultural context, you really gain an appreciation for the richness of people's lives and their stories. And it's an especially, I think, important reminder today as we're dealing with everything that we're dealing with. The book is called Mobituaries. The podcast is called Mobituaries. Mo Rocca, thank you so much for taking the time and being a part of this fundraiser for the Mark Twain Library here in the wilds of Connecticut. It means a lot to all of us, and I thank you.
And the website again for Mark Twain Library
is marktwainlibrary.org. If you have enjoyed this conversation, there's a donate button there. Chip in a few bucks and support Mark Twain's vision for this jewel in Connecticut.
Great being with you, Michael. I've had a great time. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much, Mo. Bye-bye.